Okay, well, welcome everybody to our second Kairos webinar. We've been doing these webinars in honor of our 5th year here at Union, 5 years as Kairos, 15 years almost as the Poverty Initiative. And we, the idea with the webinars is that we just wanted to be able to raise up some of the work and leadership that has been developed through the years at the Kairos Center and the Poverty Initiative to learn more from those leaders and from the struggles that we're a part of, and to share that knowledge and continue to do that work together. And the hope is that people will be tuning in to hear more about some of the struggles that are out there and some of the history from our network, and that'll help to reinvigorate people to continue the struggle. And of course, we at the Kairos Center do require funding, so we're hoping that it'll also help folks that are contributing to keep that work going. And we are scheduled to have our next webinar after this around the 18th of December, where we'll look at the kind of the Christmas story and think more about what that time of year means from the perspective of the poor and dispossessed and the struggle to end poverty today. So if you could mark on your calendars the 18th, and we'll be in touch more about the details there. But today we are very honored and happy to be joined by two amazing leaders from our network, Savina Martin and Larry Cox. Savina is a longtime organizer who is also a poverty scholar and just a general fighter in the movement. She's a veteran, a mother, was the president of the Boston chapter of the Union of the Homeless in the 1980s, currently working on the University of the Poor project that is documenting that history, the Homeless Union History Project, and is an organizer with the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign. Larry, we've known Larry for decades in this work. He's back to the early days in Philadelphia with KWRU, and Larry grew up in Ohio. He was the executive director of Amnesty International USA, and the Deputy Secretary General of Amnesty International at the global headquarters in London, and then a senior program officer at the Ford Foundation, where he helped to develop their human rights work, as a graduate of Union Theological, which is where Kairos is, and the former co-director of the Kairos Center, which he helped to found in 2013. Larry's also just a lifelong fighter and has contributed tremendously to the work of grassroots movements in the U.S. So it's just a real pleasure to have you both here, and I feel like our network and the leaders that are part of this movement have so much to learn from your stories and your insights. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think what I was hoping to do just to start was just to learn more about your history and your lives, because there's just so many rich lessons there. And I thought maybe both of you could just start. I know that 1968 was a sort of pivotal moment for both of you, and maybe you could share a little bit about your story and how that moment sort of helped to shape your understanding and inspired you in this work. Maybe we could start with you, Savina.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And Larry, as usual, I don't get to see you that much, but I'm delighted to share this space and in this most important time in our history. So thank you so much. And thank you again, Adam. Yeah, 1968 for me was a pivotal moment that shifted my paradigm at just a young child, during the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, one of the neighborhoods called Roxbury, and the community was under siege. I'm sure it was the day after, if I can remember correctly, the assassination of Dr. King. And I, was looking out of my window. The National Guard was there and the police. And I watched my mother stare the police down. Apparently, she was saying that she wanted to go look for my brothers. And the police were adamant. It looked like they were going to pick up stones, stone her. I screamed. She turned around. Everything seemed to go in slow motion. And she came in the house. And I remember that evening when my father got home from work, he put extra locks on the door. I remember the black and white television set. And I remember watching the news. And actually, I just saw the footage the other day, and it was Walter Cronkite, when he said a Negro man, Dr. Martin Luther King, was assassinated. And at that time, I was trying to figure out, well, what is a Negro man, right? So I grew up in Dr. King, of course, was seared and etched in my memory as I looked around the blighted community during that time, smelling the smoke and the fire, working class family. We were displaced, moved into a housing projects in Roxbury, and I just watched the community deteriorate. Not only just by the buildings, but the quality of life just appeared to slow down. And here I am. It was 20 years later where I knew I had dedicated my life to the struggle, and this work has been my, not only the tapestry through my history and the history of this kind of work to the movement is the only thing I know how to do and the only thing that I want to do. And I'm glad to be on board with some tremendous revolutionaries and fighters within this struggle around economic, human rights, and religious liberation from the past trauma of poverty and violation of human rights in this country, and what it continues to perpetrate on its most poor and dispossessed, right? The least of these. So, my story is every other story just about of anybody that grew up in poverty and economic disparities.
Thank you, Savina. I feel like there's so much that we could learn from your story, and it doesn't do justice to have just an hour. The same for you, Larry, but it is great to have you share that, and Larry too, if you wouldn't mind also speaking to that moment of '68 and how it helped to shape your work and inspire you.
Yeah, I first of all, I'm humbled actually to be speaking with Savina as my partner here and hearing her story. But I'm also struck by how so many of the people who have embarked on this journey that we're both on started with how they would respond to suffering and the poverty that was very close to them. My own journey began a little earlier than '68. I'm old, and I grew up trying to understand the suffering of my mother, who was a single parent, who didn't have enough money to live on. And I was trying to understand not only why she suffered, but what to do about it. And, speaking of religion, a lot of people don't talk so much anymore, progressive religious circles, about salvation. But for me, religion in a very real sense was my salvation, because I was in an isolated community. There was no struggle going on, but I saw the suffering and I didn't know what to do about it. And I turned to the book my mother always told me I should read, but that I never did, and started reading the Bible and found the story about the idea that there was this force in the universe that was on the side of the poor, which I had never picked up in the few times when I would go to church, but I picked it up from that book. But more importantly, looking around, I saw that force in action, and that's what made all the difference. I saw the movement that at that time, this was in the late 60s, 67, led by Dr. King, and but also by people like Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and Malcolm X. And to me, that was the force that I came to call God in action in the world. And even though I was geographically separate from it, I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone, that I was part of that struggle, and that struggle was part of me. And that led me to again, learning from Dr. King and his opposition to the Vietnam War. That led me to become a draft resistor, to eventually get asylum in Paris, France in 1968. In 1968 is where I also discovered the power of sort of revolution, the power of people coming together, all driven by the same sense of something inside them that was larger than them, and that pointed towards a different world. So there was an uprising in Paris in 1968. I was part of it, and to me, that cemented my idea that there is, no matter how desperate the times seem, and they always have seemed desperate, and now they seem desperate again, there is a force in the universe that is deep within us, but also that we share collectively, that is on the side of justice and pushes us towards justice. So that's how I explain the direction my life took. I can say more about what happened after 68, because, you know, it's not that it was just an easy road that leads to victory. There are other forces fighting against that and trying to distort, in fact, the power of religion and the power of human rights, and use it against us. And then we're also, because we're human, we might try to follow God, but we're not God. We make mistakes. And I think the movement has made mistakes and got set back. Although the main reason we got set back was because of the reactionary forces we were up against.
Thank you, Larry. It's really, really insightful. And again, I think there's so many lessons that can be learned from that. And I wonder if both of you could also just take a minute to share, because you have so many years of experience in this struggle. And, you know, I think a lot of the folks that are going to watch this and that we're going to share this with are in a moment, like, you know, we all are in this moment, but I think everyone sort of, there's just questions that are being raised, and having the two of you with this longer perspective, I think is just invaluable to how we come together and organize today. So I wonder if both of you would be willing to share just some of the kind of key lessons that you've learned in these years, and that you've seen as you've been part of the struggle, and as you've tried to work to bring the poor together, bring people together into a social force that can resist, and just anything that you think would be important to share with leaders today, and as we again are faced with another moment of struggle and potential for change. Maybe we could start with you, Savina.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, here we are, 50 years after the assassination of Dr. King, and understanding that these same conditions that motivated Dr. King and others to, you know, launch the original Poor People's Campaign are the same, if not worse, conditions today. That we know we need each other to pull this movement forward, right? You know, let me just step back to the mid-'80s. I had just a couple of years out of high school decided to join the United States Army. Horrible decision. I have some regrets, but also the beauty that came out of that was I woke up and I began to organize across the country with the National Union of the Homeless after experiencing my own situation, right? And some of those lessons during the 1980s with the National Union of the Homeless, which was an organization that was grounded in leadership training and really re-engaging in our own struggles of poverty and taking back, organizing and taking back what is ours. You know, of course, everyone knows that we launched winter offenses and took over abandoned housing and, you know, marched all over this country, taking over abandoned housing and raising our fists to the, you know, to those forces, right? The state agents that, you know, we're up against. And one of my mentors always says, we are up against a most sophisticated enemy. We need to really understand who that enemy is. And one of the most valuable lessons that I learned from the National Union of the Homeless is we must educate, continue to educate the cadre, right? We must continue to educate so that we can all understand those forces that we're up against, because we're not our own enemies, right? We are not our own enemies. We must organize, 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 and continue to, you know, change the system, right? That's just that's a little lesson.
No, yeah, no, I feel like it is one of the hardest lessons to learn is this, to taking time to study, and especially when we're in the midst of real kind of immediate struggles. But I really do appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like I've heard that from other longtime leaders too, that there's just no way we're going to win unless we develop that sophistication. So I appreciate that. Larry, is there anything you would want to add in your?
Yeah, there's a lot, actually. I mean, I certainly agree with what Savina was saying, but I also, in my experience, a couple of key things. One is that we need to keep lifting up the experience of people. A lot of times we can think that those of us who have developed a certain political sophistication, that's enough. But I think what we really need is to be holding up and learning from the experience of people who don't think of themselves as political activists or revolutionaries, but who are struggling every single day with the oppression of this system and who know what's wrong with it. And we need to not only listen to their experiences in terms of what they're going through, but also hold up the values that sustain them and strengthen them and give them the power to withstand the kind of oppression that I'm sure Savina and I have seen many, many times and are seeing today. So that's the first thing, to keep, whenever I've seen movements that begin to forget about those values and that experience and start talking about either jargon, either human rights jargon or political jargon, but stop talking about the kind of values that people treasure, I think those movements begin to get into trouble and atrophy and die. And the second thing is that, and I think that's happening. I think you can see it. I think people are, right now, you see in various movements, whether it's the students fighting against gun violence, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's the homeless that Savina has been talking about, people are rediscovering that they have this power within them and that these values that they represent are extremely powerful. But the hard thing now, I think, is to begin to translate those values into a critique of the system that has held us back, and so that people can understand. I think this is what Savina was talking about, developing people who really understand how the system works, what's wrong with it, and most importantly, and here's where I think we haven't done enough and we're not very good at yet, how it can be made better in a way that people can understand, in a way that people can feel like, yeah, I can see how that could work, and feel confident that the changes that we're pushing for will really improve the lives of people, including the lives of those who are the most oppressed. So I think we have to begin to develop sort of a positive program that says to people, here's why these things are happening. It's not because of your failure. It's not because you screwed up. It's because the whole system works like this. But also, here's how we can change it. And here's what we can do. And begin to put forward very concrete demands. And as I've been working with the Kairos Center, with the Poor People's Campaign, and now I got involved in electoral politics in this last midterm, going around door to door talking to people about what they were thinking. And you see people hungry for that, for what can be different? How can it be better? And finding it hard to believe it can be different. So I think that's the big challenge before us, to not only have the values and lift them up, but show how those values can be translated into a different kind of world and a vision. We had a vision in 1968 that the world could be different. And I think we need to get back to putting forward that vision. But as Dr. King did so well, begin to link it to a critique of the systems that are not functioning, that are denying that vision, that hold that vision back and keep us back. So that's, to me, those two things, holding up the experience of people and then translating that experience into concrete proposals for how things can get better. To me, that's the big challenge in front of us right now.
You are so right. I appreciate just what you said, Larry. I just recently had the opportunity this past Sunday to speak with a group of mothers and grandmothers. And we were at a church, and we held a meet and greet. And this group of mothers each told their valuable stories, their stories of trauma and heartache at the injustices of this system. And of course, I went straight into recalling Isaiah 10:2, right? To deprive the poor of justice and to deny the rights of the needy among my people, right? And how dare you leave our widows and, our mothers, widows, and orphans, right? But these policies that continue to snatch poor women's children from them, right? That's the sin of this system. Not to blame the poor for their poverty, but that's the sin. And these mothers and grandmothers each told their powerful stories about their grandchildren who were taken from the mothers, for several different reasons, but not to just snatch them and then not return them or give them to another immediate family member who may have the wherewithal to care for those children until, the mother's needs can be, met in agreement, right? But the system continues to do this. And of course, we see this playing out right now at the border and with immigration crisis, humanitarian crisis that we're faced with right now. But these mothers understood clearly that day that we don't have to do this fight alone anymore. They raised their fists and they said, we've been fighting over 17 years trying to get my grandchildren's children, right? It's just many different stories. And they were so I'm nearly relieved to tears to know that there is a space for them to enter into where they can fight with other fighters. So yeah, it's so key that, wow, we don't have to do this alone. I don't have to scrape up the mountain alone. Here I am. Yes, I'll join the Poor People's Campaign and fight together, to hopefully help win this battle and change some of these policies that are continuously, causing the pain and suffering, really, literally, for being poor.
Yeah, I mean, that's so great. I think about the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, this kind of organizing effort and movement of the poor and dispossessed today that has been growing and emerging and really bringing people together that really never, I don't think, imagined they would be sitting next to each other, marching next to each other, talking and sharing their stories right next to each other. And I feel like what you were saying, Larry, this vision of an alternative, and I mean, my understanding of this period in the 60s, there was this big ideological battle, like globally, where you had socialism and this sort of different model of social organization that was kind of, assumed under that idea of socialism versus this capitalist democracy. Not that you can't have democracy within socialism, but that was sort of the way that the debate was framed. But I think, as you said, Larry, it did give a clear kind of concrete picture of what an alternative might look like, how the economy might be a more just economy, and how the lives of those suffering might be made better under one system versus another. Not everybody sort of lined up behind those ideologies, but that was sort of what was out there, and what gave people somewhat of a vision. And I think about the campaign today, and the kind of the climate that we're in. I mean, a lot of young people are not afraid to use those words again, but there is still a lingering kind of stigma with that word, especially in this country. And so to think about an alternative today, I don't know. Like I feel like part of what's been attractive about the campaign, the Poor People's Campaign, is this this moral kind of language and this moral vision, and this way that there's the leadership of religious leaders that are putting out a different kind of understanding of that, and that does start to provide a vision. But I agree that there is still not the same type of concreteness and in the way that there was maybe in the 60s of what that alternative looks like. But I mean, all that to say, I feel like it would be great to hear you both speak more to that kind of moral vision. And I know that both of you through your lives have thought about or went down the road to becoming ministers, and just what why that has been important, and what sort of like obstacles you see to religion playing a role in providing that kind of vision today. And just to hear more about that from you. Maybe Larry, you could start.
Well, just to go back to what you were saying about the 60s, I mean, we had a kind of, I would call it almost like an apocalyptic vision. And it was partly because of the struggles that have been going on for a decade. People just had been under so much violence. We had, this, horrific, ugly, genocidal almost war going on in Vietnam. We had the kind of violence that took the lives of people like Dr. King, but also earlier took Malcolm, Medgar Evers, Fred Hampton. I mean, leaders were being killed. So it was very difficult to sort of, think about, it almost coalesced around an idea of, well, we just got to bring this whole thing down, And that was very tempting, and I was part of that. So this is a self-criticism. But I think we also scared a lot of people who didn't know what was going to take its place. And we have to learn from that. And I think the thing about a ministry, and I don't know if Savina would agree with this, I think maybe she would, is that it's a long-term battle. I'm not looking for the apocalyptic, tomorrow everything is going to change, but I'm looking for a commitment on the part of people to steadily and slowly begin to listen to people, to begin to put forward policies and programs that will begin to roll back the power of capital and the power of the people who run this economy back into the hands of the people that actually produce in this economy and that hold their families together, that will roll it back. But it has to be very, in my opinion, very, concrete and real, and make people feel like, yeah, we can really do this. We can really we can win some victories, because rather than just waiting for the ultimate victory, which was some kind of, again, almost to put it in religious terms, it was almost like we were waiting for the Messiah. We were waiting for the second coming. And I don't think that's what God demands. I think God demands that every single day you get up and you fight in whatever way you can to begin to put forward and win struggles that will make people's lives better. And if you do that, you can start to build a very broad-based movement. I think people are so hungry right now for that. You see it when people, come out and onto the streets whenever they get a chance to come out on the streets. I mean, the Women's March, various other marches. I think people are hungry for something, but they got to know that what we're fighting for really offers them a chance for a better life. And we got to lift up the kind of mothers and grandmothers that Savino was describing. Their experience, their knowledge has to be at the front of it. And we have to tell those stories. I was part of a human rights movement after things sort of collapsed in the mid-70s. I got involved in the human rights movement, which was sort of my second salvation, because it went back to sort of basics. It said everybody has these inherent rights and you got to fight for these rights. And that whole movement, which grew, was built on people telling their stories of how they were oppressed. And almost when they told that story, you could almost immediately see the way it could be different. I mean, first of all, if they had been locked up and tortured, obviously the solution was to get them out of prison and get them out of torture. But we over time, we started thinking that we could, not putting those people at the center and instead putting, the UN and blah, 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 and law, but no longer focused on the experience of people. And that movement began to lose its power, because the power comes from exactly the kind of people that Savina was describing, those mothers, those grandmothers, and their children. And we got to both lift it up, as I say, and we have to begin to show how out of that experience we can develop struggles that can win really concrete victories for people. They may not bring down the whole system, they won't bring down the whole system at once, but they can begin to shift power away from the people that are controlling the economy and have a stranglehold on this tiny, really minuscule oligarchy that controls the system, and begin to return it to the people who make everything function. So that to me is what I learned from the 60s, and I feel like it's been a long, hard struggle in between 68 and 2018, 50 years. But I don't know if, Savino, you feel this way, but I feel like we're at another moment like that, where that's why we named the center the Kairos Center, because the Kairos means precisely a special moment. And I just feel like we're in that moment, but we can blow it. We can not meet its challenge if we don't look very clearly and hard-headed at what we have to do to persuade people that we don't have to live like this. These people don't have to suffer for another 17 years, as Savina described. We can make changes right now that will make lives better for people. If we can start to do that, we'll build a movement that fulfills the promise and the vision that Dr. King and so many others had before they were killed.
Absolutely.
I got carried away there.
No, that's great, Larry. Thank you so much. I want to come back to this religion question, though. But Savina, did you have any reflections on that, or?
Yeah, very good, very good. I remember, Larry, in 2013, I think, when we had launched the Kairos Center there at Union, and I remember hearing you talking and defining the word Kairos, and it stuck with me. It is a moment. I feel that. You can feel it, and everybody else is feeling it too, but they're not quite understanding what that is, right? What is that thing we're feeling? And I think it turns into anxiousness rather than the patience of being able to understand and stop and breathe. We're doing the practical work. You've done the practical work. Put down your toolkit for a minute, and let's understand here together collectively, one mind, one body, one sound, as Reverend Barbara says, and just know that we are on a continuum. And this is some hard work.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be challenging. And yes, we're going to tug and struggle with one another. We're going through that in our embryonic stages right now in Massachusetts with the Poor People's Campaign. It's supposed to go through that. We went through those 40 days hard and fast because that's what we know how to do. What we've been doing, right? We know how to hammer and nail and go and rah, rah, rah. But then when we go back to our respective silos and collectives, it's like, what next? Well, what next we've been conditioned to do is to run right back again, hammer and nail, put up another sign and run back without a clear vision that we can just take a step back and realize that this is going to be not as fast as you want it to be, but things can happen now. We can make some changes.
Yeah.
Like you said, Larry, these women do not have to do it another 17 years. We are out to build a broad-based movement that is just filled with, faith leaders and cultural arts I mean, the cultural arts, right? And music has to be a part of that. We should be saturating the communities. When I look back to, you know, the 1960s in my community, we heard the music. You know, the music was in line and it was in step with the times, right? With the Vietnam War, there was an energy that was going on and we were ready. But then they killed everybody, right?
Yeah.
They blew up my community. 15 blocks burned down twice, right? I talk about the God in the rubble. Where is the God among the rubble of where I live at, right? And you know, and we have to realize that this thing is not going to take tomorrow, right? We are at a time that has come, but where do we go from here, right? We must begin to build this movement, to educate one another, to collectivize the struggle. And, you know, like I believe one of my comrades says, we're building this plane while we're flying it.
Well, you really, that's very inspiring to hear and very encouraging. And I think, to me, I have a very broad definition of religion, to go back to Adam's question about religion. And one of the expressions, I think one of the way that one experiences what I call God, but other people may call another name, but one of the way you experience it is through music. It's through the arts, through the creative. That's where you get a feel that something could be different. And as Rosa Luxemburg said, if you can't have I think it was Emma Goldman who said, if I can't dance to it, it's not the revolution. I mean, you got to have that kind of power. And so that to me is a very, I mean, I think that inspiration, that strength of that music gave us is partly what we need to nurture. We need to cultivate. We need to pay attention to it. And the other thing is that I just really appreciate what you said about the internal struggles that have to go on. Because the other thing about religion, and this is one of the things I worry about always, is that, you know, there's always a tendency, it's a human tendency, it's not just the left, but there's a human tendency to confuse, you know, once we start saying, well, you know, we're following God, or we're the moral people, to begin to think that we are God. You know, that we're so moral that we're not going to make mistakes. What we say is the way it is. And you got to have the humility that I think is inherent in my religious tradition anyway, which is that, you know, God is God, but we can try to follow God, but we're human and we're going to make mistakes, and that's all right. We got to make mistakes. The key thing is to learn from those mistakes and try to ask ourselves, well, why didn't that work better? Why, what do we have to do now? How do we build on, for example, those 40 days, but not just repeat it over and over again? Because then people go like, well, I don't have time to just go in the streets and yell and so on. And how do we keep from seeming to think that we are appearing to be self-righteous? I'll tell you something, just one more thing and then I'll shut up. In going around knocking on doors, trying to elect you know, an African-American leader in where I live now, which is 87 to 90% white. And he was under incredible racist attacks from his opponent. So we were going door to door, knocking on people. And not just to people that already agreed with us, but people who said they were Republicans. I talked to more Republicans in 1 month than I have talked to Republicans in my entire life. I mean, you know, and what I found was that once you started talking to people, a lot of times they were open. They were confused, but they weren't bad people. And they certainly weren't immoral people. They were just confused about what was the way to hold on to what little they had. And I found, like, if we could offer them something, a lot of people can be won over. And that's what we got to do. That's what we're talking about, the patience and the hard work and the slow work. You got to talk to people. You got to listen to people. And to me, I think a lot of people are realizing that we gotta get out of our little bubble. I think you used the word silo. We got to get out of those little silos. We got to reach out to people that we're not that comfortable talking with, who may not immediately agree with us, but who are good people, and are hoping. So that to me is a hope. If we can be self-critical, we can realize we don't have all the answers, but together we can develop real answers for people, and by listening to the people themselves who often have better ideas than those of us who think that we're the leaders.
Yeah. It's like, you know, I often think about the belief system, right? What have we been taught to believe?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, some of us have had to believe something by way of trauma. You know, we've had to be whipped into believing certain things. So in the most, you know, I'm speaking spiritually and, you know, that religion question again. The belief system is one of the most hardest things to dismantle, but it's not impossible, right? I grew up a Catholic, went through all the rituals, right? The nuns would come to my house and pick me up in the midst of the 60s and take me to catechism class or to camp. And as I got older, I thought there was something else as I was searching for God among the rubble. Well, this is something. I'm not just, you know, I mean, I'm in the confession booth and what am I confessing? Lord, I haven't done anything. I don't, you know, is it a sin because you know, I don't know. But anyway, those questions we ask ourselves because we were taught to believe something must be looked at carefully as we begin to canvass, right, and talk to people, because it's not impossible. But it is a most difficult thing to dismantle, just like the physical systems. Right? This system has taught us to believe certain things about the classes, but it's not impossible to begin to dismantle those things that have set up the system, just like, you know, religion. But we're up against here, you know, what I call the second plantation of some religion, right? The slaveholder religion. That's the most difficult place to go sometimes, because you see thousands of congregants within these churches that really, really believe that they individually are the sinners. And if they don't stay in the church and continue to pay their way to heaven, then they'll go to hell. So that belief, the belief system is a very delicate and surgical place that we have to go to begin to win people over. I see it every, you know, they're teaching, the right teaching, you know, but that distorted moral narrative, we've got to hold that narrative.
Yeah. No, and it you know, I feel like part of the sort of the difficulty today is almost, it's not that, I think that sometimes we imagine there is like this vacuum of moral vision and moral kind of leadership, but that in fact there is a morality that, or something that's claiming to be morality, that is operating through the system, that says that, you know, it's okay that there's, you know, full employment means that 6% of people don't work, or that we're always going to have some poverty, and that there is some morality out there. And it's just, I think that part of the challenge is just even recognizing that there is something, you know, that you have to challenge, and that and instead of, you know, when the impression is that there's nothing out there, then you're like, well, you know, morality and religion doesn't really matter, doesn't have any influence. But when you see that there is in fact a dominant theology, or kind of a distortion of theology, and a distorted morality that is influencing people, then that, I think, helps to, like, you know, challenge people to say, well, no, wait, what do I actually believe in? And what, you know, how does this correspond with my experience of how people should be treated, and what I think the value of life is. But not until you recognize that can you sort of step in and challenge it.
Yeah, and I think there are two things, just to build on what you're saying, there are two things that are happening right now. One is that, you know, people, and this has been going on for a long time, to go to Savina's point, people understand the power of religion, and they understand the power of values and the power of morals. In fact, sometimes the people who are in charge understand that better than the people who are doing the opposing. and they use it, but they use a distorted form of it. I think that's what Savino is talking about. They almost turn it upside down and try to say, no, this is what God means. This is what God wants. This is, and those people are sinners because, and you can tell they're sinners because they haven't succeeded. They haven't made a ton of money. If you make a ton of money, the whole prosperity gospel thing is a deliberate distortion of the religious tradition in order to keep people oppressed. So there's that attempt to distort religion, which then turns people off completely. They say, well, that's religion. I have nothing to do with it, because that doesn't help me. It doesn't liberate me. It oppresses me. So they just say, well, enough with that. But the other thing is that we're seeing a resurgence of a different kind of religion, what I would call the real one. And so there's a direct assault on that religion, on those values, a direct assault. And under this leader that we have now, it's really an attempt not just to distort Christianity, but to replace it with really what is a kind of, a fascist kind of identity politics, white supremacy, kind of, power is the value, not love, not compassion, but power. And you can tell that I'm the powerful one. You'll see a president now who will never, ever admit weakness, because for him, it's all about power and money and wealth. And that's the value he wants people to accept. And those who fight it, literally getting now under assault. Like what happened in Pittsburgh was, to me, a direct assault on the heart of the Judeo-Christian, especially Judaism, values about compassion for the stranger, compassion for the immigrant. Those people were killed because the guy who killed them thought they were helping immigrants. They were helping refugees. That's why he did it. And that value of we ought to, at the heart of our lives should be, how do we reach out to those who are most oppressed and the stranger among us. That's now under direct assault. And we got to say, no to that, and really organize around that, and say no to the distortion of religion, no to the belief systems that Savina was describing that hold us back, and no to the direct assault on love, compassion, which they'll either make fun of, they denigrate, or they say it's a threat to you. If you love the people that are trying to escape the violence in Central America and come to our country, that's a threat to us. So to me, that's a call for all of us to fight the what I would call the religious war on two fronts. One is to reclaim the genuine liberatory gospel, and second, to fight against the kind of pseudo-religion, which is what fascism was. I mean, fascism was just another religion, but it was a demonic religion. It was a false religion. It was an idolatrous religion. It made the leader the god. And you see those tendencies. I'm not saying it's full-fledged yet, but you see those tendencies in the kind of movements that are developing in this country. So I think the work of the Kairos Center and other groups like that is critically important to begin to lift up a different way of looking at religion, and not just to lift it up, but to fight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, that's really powerful, Larry. I think very clear. But it's almost like, as you were saying that, I'm thinking that the left in this kind of, liberal, whatever generally defined liberal kind of section of society that is engaged in struggle, but has traditionally been adverse to religion and sort of tries to stay in this like neutral territory of everyone's beliefs are accepted and there's no one answer, and religion sort of is this individual practice, and secular values, like as they are presented through the Constitution, and which of course was rooted in religious principles. But anyway, the point is almost like this left understanding of religion and adversity to religion is almost more of a challenge than this distorted theology that has emerged in the Christian nationalist forums and stuff, because it kind of, it's part of the problem that we faced in organizing over the years is like, for people to be like, well, I don't know about if I want to take up religion or morality, or like I'm gonna fight for this issue, but I don't want to enter into those waters and just like you said, just like directly make a fight against that and claim a certain morality and take sides and define where God is in the struggle and what side God is on. And but yeah, like it's just overcoming that. But I feel like it has been more like if you listen to Liz, the director here at Kairos Center and co-chair of the national campaign, she'll say that it's like those are the conversations that she wants to get into and that she feels like more and more people want to hear and that have been more effective in moving people. And I think that's what your experience and your insights are saying as well, Larry. But did you have any thoughts on that, Savina?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that this is a time where we need to have these new Bible studies, right? That are going to answer some of the compelling questions that people have as we look for God, right, within the struggle, and where is he, and we're questioning that. But we also understand and we know that there is a power greater than ourselves, right? We want to believe that. So we should begin to engage folks as we're learning to fight and teaching as we lead, the power of having these Bible studies that answer the questions that my sister Liz continues to teach. I mean, just powerful. And Liz, I know you can't be everywhere at every time, but we've got to teach, right? We've got to teach the cadre to have these Bible studies.
Yes.
If we were to evaluate ourselves on the side of compassion, I don't think we would get a normal bell curve. We would be totally skewed on the side of compassion, right? And so is that how God evaluates us when we meet the kids at the border? Does he just want to know, do we have the compassion? No, we're failing. We're failing on the side of compassion.
Yeah, and I think it's also, God works in mysterious ways, right? In different times in history. And I think one place to find answers to this is in the Bible. But I feel like sometimes my secular friends or people who define themselves as secular don't realize just how central to their lives faith is and values are, even if they don't use biblical language to express it. They're expressing it. And we've got to recognize that and also, lift it up. So, if you're fighting because you want justice and you want freedom and you believe that we can have that. To me, that's an expression of faith. I feel like sometimes we all have different ministries. I feel like my own ministry is more like I want to be like the apostle to the non-believers, because I think they're the ones who have gotten confused about what religion really is and what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean believing in necessarily some doctrine or some specific idea, as much as it means believing that there is this ultimate source and power, as Savino was saying, and that it's expressed in things like compassion and in decency and in respect for every human being. In a way, the human rights movement was that. I mean, it was an attempt to express in secular language the religious values that we had all grown up in. And I think it was very powerful until it began to forget precisely that that's what it was about, that it wasn't about just the outcome, which were laws and UN commissions, and all, but it was about the fact that these values of equality for all, dignity for all, those values are rooted in each of us. And that to me is what religion ought to be about. And then, as I said, the difficult thing is then translating those values into real concrete demands that can make people see, yeah, if we took love seriously, if we took compassion seriously, if we took equality seriously, if we took justice seriously, we would have to change this system in these specific ways. And I'm hoping that that's how things will I think I don't only hope that's how they will develop. That's how I see them developing. I think people are pushing
Yes.
for really a concrete program that says we don't have to live a life where the powerful are rule everybody else, or people who have certain kind of power rule over everybody else. We can have a life where everybody has dignity, respect, and freedom.
Yeah, this has been such a rich discussion, and I, in a way, feel like we were just getting going. There's just so much more to like think about, and I feel like just having this discussion is contributing to what you're both talking about in terms of making this fight and standing up and showing what kind of vision and values we hold dear and how we have to kind of put those into action. This discussion here, I think, is going to help move that forward, and I really hope that we can continue to do that together, Larry and Savina, as the days to come become hard, and there's, like you said, it's been a lot of work to do, and we have to kind of keep plugging away, but rooted in this deep kind of belief and commitment to what is true and what is right. But also in terms of the broader work of the Kairos Center, which I think is helping through the network of leaders that have been through our process here and have come together in this moment across the country. And so we just want to remind folks that are listening and viewing these webinars that if you can, go online and to sign up for the newsletter at kairoscenter.org and subscribe to all our materials, which there's a lot of these discussions, and a lot of folks from the struggle that are offering a lot of really powerful insights, and also consider making a donation to keep that work going and fund our folks out there in struggle. But again, just a big thank you. Oh, and before I wrap it, I wanted to again remind folks that December 18th, we're going to do a Bible study in this kind of critical moment when a lot of folks are thinking about religion and what it means to be moral around Christmas. And so we're going to take up that story of the birth of hope, the birth of Jesus, and kind of what that means, and by looking at it through the perspective of the struggle today. So if you can come back on December 18th, and we'll talk more about that. But thank you so much, Savina and Larry, for all the work you've done and are continuing to do, and for sharing some of your insights with us here today. It really is, we really are very grateful for you both.
Thank
love
you.
guys.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Thank you, and God bless us all.
Yes. Talk to you.
Amen. All right.